They laughed when I walked into the courtroom, and for a second, the sound felt like a draft under a locked door, thin, mean, and colder than it had any right to be. My daughter Patricia leaned toward her husband, Michael. Their designer sleeves whispering, their whispers sharper than cutlery. I carried my old handbag like a shield and wore shoes meant for long corridors and long days. You could see their verdict written on their faces before the judge ever took the bench, confused widow, ripe for the taking. They were wrong, of course, but I let them have their moment. The camera of memory lingers. The audience leans in, and I set my trap with silence. 6 months earlier, when the machines at the hospital hummed a low tremor and the clock read 6 p.m., Robert squeezed my fingers and whispered, "They will come for you. Dorothy, let them try." He always said it with a smile that made promises feel like facts. Cancer has a way of not caring about promises, but Robert's voice still carried weight. He died the way he lived, firm, kind, and certain. And when the will was read 2 weeks later at 10 a.m., certainty followed like a tide through the lawyer's paneled office to my beloved wife, Dorothy Hamilton. He leaves the estate, the properties, the investments, the business holdings valued at approximately $62 million. Patricia's tissue box hit the rug. "That's impossible," she said, and Michael's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. The lawyer cleared his throat and added that our daughter received a family photo and Robert's watch. Michael, to his credit, was left the golf clubs. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so familiar how quickly love turns into ledger lines when entitlement feels cheated. Back home, Patricia perched on my sofa with practiced concern and an undertow of calculation. "Be reasonable, Mom," she said, while Michael ran words like trust and fiduciary, and you won't have to worry over the soft underside of, "I'll take it from here." I poured tea and watched steam coil upward like a second chance. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I'm perfectly capable." Patricia's smile tightened. "Are you, though?" The insult was wrapped in satin, but it was still a knife. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday at 9:15 a.m. The courier boy's cheeks red from the wind, his eyes apologizing for something he didn't understand. Elder abuse, they wrote, manipulation, fraud. They recast my grief as confusion and my privacy as paranoia. Receipts from a wrong turn near Patricia's neighborhood became proof of decline. Asking my granddaughter to set up Netflix became evidence of incompetence. Michael's sworn statement dripped with paternal kindness the way a wolf wears lamb's wool. "You'll have a nice allowance." Patricia told me on the phone, her voice sweet as syrup and twice as sticky. "Enough for your needs." I looked out the window then at a bright red cardinal landing on the feeder and thought how luck sometimes feels like a test. "And where would I live?" I asked. "Oh, the Martha's Vineyard house suits you," she said lightly. "We'll take the main place." Of course. That night, I opened the envelope Robert had tucked away 2 years earlier for a day just like this. Margaret Walsh, it said in his hand, in the same confident ink he used for love notes and instructions nobody else ever saw. A judge now, but she had once been Margaret O'Brien, my study rival and the only person who ever beat me to the cold call in Professor Williams' class. I dialed the number, Judge Walsh's chambers. A voice answered, and I said, "This is Dorothy Hamilton. I believe you know me as Dorothy Mitchell." A beat, then a warmth I hadn't heard in decades. "Dorothy the Destroyer. Is it really you?" "It is," I said, staring at the gold frame around our wedding photo. "I have a case you should know about. Your daughter's suit," she said softly, and I could hear paper being lifted, examined, understood. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" "Old habits die hard," I said, and from the other end came a small, fierce laugh that tasted like the old days. "Then don't let them see you coming," Margaret said. "Not until it's too late." I chose my old navy dress for the first hearing. The fabric knows how to listen and how to wait. When the bailiff called order and the judge entered, Margaret's eyes found mine, steady and unreadable. Patricia didn't notice. Michael did, and he didn't like what he saw. I set my handbag on the table and folded my hands. Let them believe in the myth of the helpless mother a little longer. The longer a shadow stretches, the brighter the reveal. Morrison rose with a rustle of expensive wool, his voice smooth as a salesman's promise, as the clock over the seal blinked and 30 a.m. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter," he began, and in 3 practice minutes he painted me as a trembling widow who had wandered into a fortune she could not comprehend. Elder abuse, potential fraud, urgent relief required. The words stacked like bricks until the picture felt heavy, and then he patted the wall as if to say, "See sturdy as truth." When Judge Walsh turned to me, her tone was even. "Mrs. Hamilton, you're representing yourself," I nodded, fingers resting in the quiet of my lap. "Yes, Your Honor. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings? My daughter believes I lack the capacity to manage what my husband left me," I said, keeping my voice soft enough to pass beneath their guards. "I contest that." Morrison pounced on the softness. "Your Honor, capacity is not a matter of sentiment. We seek a competency evaluation and temporary conservatorship to protect assets that are being mismanaged as we speak." I lifted my eyes, the way a diver looks up to measure the light. "May I ask a question?" Margaret's eyebrow tilted, the way it used to when a student offered something unexpected. "Proceed." "Mr. Morrison, you refer to manipulation surrounding my husband's will, which was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed. Are you alleging that the witnesses and the notary were also manipulated?" He disliked the angle. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened before he smiled. "Your Honor, the respondent misunderstands the legal framework I understand perfectly," I said gently. "You have no medical evidence, no neuropsychological evaluation, only anecdotes about Netflix and navigation." A murmur slid through the benches. Patricia stiffened. Michael's lips pressed thin. Morrison straightened, choosing bluster over absence. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hamilton lacks the legal knowledge to grasp by whom is she being coached." "Mr. Morrison," Judge Walsh asked, a hint of dry weather in her tone. "She is alone at the table." Silence has a flavor when it changes, like the air before rain. I felt it then, that subtle shift, and decided the waiting had done its work. I reached into my handbag, the same one Patricia mocked for looking like it had lived a life, and placed my Massachusetts bar card on the table where light could find it. "Your Honor," I said, no louder than before, for the sake of clarity. The clerk took it to the bench. There was a heartbeat where time stretched like taffy, where memory and present overlapped, and I was 26 again with ink on my fingers and case law under my skin. Judge Walsh read, blinked once, then twice, schooling her features into judicial calm. "Mrs. Hamilton, you are a licensed attorney." "Yes, Your Honor." Admitted in 1982, license current. I stepped away to raise my daughter. I never stepped away from the law. The gallery inhaled in one sound, like the sea catching its breath. Patricia's mouth opened and closed without words. I recognized the little girl in her for a fleeting second, the one who used to fall asleep on my shoulder at 9 p.m. after ballet. Michael leaned toward Morrison, whispering hard math strategy minus foundation equals panic. Morrison recovered as men like him do, with volume. "This changes nothing," he insisted. "Experience is not competence, and recent behavior indicates decline." "What behavior?" I asked, turning to the jury box that wasn't there and the public that was, that I let my granddaughter teach me streaming so she would feel useful, that I missed an exit during construction. If these are grounds for conservatorship, half this city should surrender their car keys by lunchtime. Judge Walsh cut through the ripple. "Mr. Morrison, do you have medical documentation? We request a neurological evaluation," he said, a little too quickly. "On what basis?" "Family observations consistent with decline. Family observations consistent with inconvenience," I replied, letting steel enter the warmth. "There is a difference between grief and incapacity, between learning and failing." The clock ticked to 11 a.m. Morrison asked for a continuance, citing new developments. Margaret denied it with a single sentence. "You filed an urgent petition. You may proceed urgently." I watched Patricia then, the first hairline crack in her certainty appearing like frost on glass. She looked at me the way one looks at a painting they've misnamed for years. During the recess, the hallway smelled like varnish and worry. Morrison approached with a modest smile, the kind bankers use when they pretend to be your neighbor. "Perhaps we can discuss a settlement," he said, and the word we echoed inside the word mistake. A more equitable distribution might spare everyone further pain. I held his gaze and felt Robert as if he were standing at my shoulder at 11:20 am, warm and sure, equitable to whom I asked, to the people who called me incompetent at breakfast and charitable at lunch. His smile faltered. "Your daughter expected something. She expected me to be small," I said. And in the reflection of the glass door, I watched Patricia watching me, her face a puzzle with one piece missing. I am finished obliging her. When we returned to the courtroom, Morrison called Patricia as his first witness, and the room tilted as my child walked past me without looking, her heels clicking at the speed of regret. The story they had built began to wobble under its own weight, and I felt the tide turn the way a sailor feels current in her bones. "Mom," Patricia whispered as she raised her hand to be sworn, the word barely breath. "Why didn't you tell me I folded my fingers together to steady the tremor that wasn't fear, only history?" "Because you never asked," I said inside myself, and then out loud to no one and everyone, because sometimes the only way to teach respect is to stop hiding strength. Patricia's voice trembled when she began, the silk of confidence gone. After my father's death, my mother seemed different. She said, eyes darting toward me, then away. She asked me questions about transferring money, about online accounts. She seemed confused. Morrison guided her gently, his tone dipped in sympathy. "And this concerned you?" "At the time, yes," she whispered. "But now," she trailed off, caught between old loyalty and the glare of her husband's expectations. "But now what?" Mrs. Brooks Morrison pressed. Patricia swallowed. Now I wonder if she was testing me. The words slipped out before she could pull them back. A ripple moved through the courtroom like wind through tall grass. Morrison's jaw clenched. He'd lost control of his own witness. Judge Walsh's gaze sharpened. "Mrs. Brooks, do you believe your mother is mentally incompetent?" Patricia hesitated, tears pooling, the weight of years hanging between us. "I don't know anymore," she whispered finally. That single sentence cracked their entire case like porcelain under pressure. Morrison tried to recover, but you can't rebuild a lie once truth has started to breathe. When court adjourned for lunch, I found myself standing by the window in the hallway, watching the rain smear across the glass. Patricia approached quietly, the way she used to as a girl when she'd done something wrong. "Mom," she said softly, "why didn't you ever tell me you were a lawyer?" I didn't turn immediately. "Because you never asked." I said finally, "I wanted to be your mother, not your example." She blinked back tears. "I thought you were just ordinary," I finished for her, turning now. "That's the thing about mothers, Patricia. You only see what you need from us until you're forced to see the rest." Her lip quivered. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. Michael said a lot of things," I interrupted gently. "What matters is what you believed." She nodded, small, broken, unsure. For the first time in years, I saw the little girl who used to beg for bedtime stories, not the woman who measured love in inheritance. That evening, the phone rang at 8:30 p.m. Patricia again. Her voice was quieter now, like someone who'd finally stopped performing. "Mom, can we fix this?" "That depends," I said. "Do you want to fix your reputation or our relationship?" There was silence, then a sob. "I just want you to forgive me." I closed my eyes. "Forgiveness isn't a door you can kick open. Patricia, you have to knock and wait. Michael says you made us look stupid," she muttered. "Michael will say whatever keeps him safe," I replied. "But you need to decide whose side you're really on." She was crying now, whispering apologies I didn't fully believe yet. "I love you, Mom. I love you too," I said. "But love without respect is just noise. The next morning, Patricia arrived alone. Her eyes were red, her makeup minimal. For a moment, hope stirred. But 20 minutes later, Michael stormed in, his suit sharper. His new lawyer sharper still, a young man named David Chen, who walked like he was auditioning for victory. He demanded a sidebar with the judge, his words sharp enough to cut air. When they returned, his new argument twisted the knife of irony. Your Honor, we contend that Mrs. Hamilton deliberately deceived her family into believing she was incompetent. This manipulation itself demonstrates emotional instability and unfitness to manage her estate. It was almost poetic, the same accusation, flipped like a coin and equally worthless. So, Judge Walsh said dryly, you're arguing that she's both too confused and too cunning to handle her affairs. Chen's smile was a blade. Precisely. The inconsistency of her behavior is the inconsistency of being underestimated. I cut in. Forgive me, Your Honor, but Mr. Chen is mistaking strategy for instability. He turned, pouncing. Mrs. Hamilton, do you admit to deceiving your family? I admit, I said, to allowing them to show me who they really are. The air thickened. Every word landed heavy, deliberate. If concern had truly motivated them, I continued, they would have called a doctor, not a lawyer. Patricia's gaze dropped to the floor, tears sliding down her cheek. Michael stared ahead, jaw locked. Instead, I said, they filed papers to seize control of assets that my husband entrusted to me. They gambled on my silence. They lost. Chen objected, calling my words manipulative, performative. Your Honor, she's orchestrated this entire spectacle to humiliate her family. Judge Walsh leaned forward. Mr. Chen, the only humiliation here is self-inflicted. The courtroom's hush deepened, and for the first time since Robert's funeral, I felt something close to peace settle in my chest. Still, the game wasn't over. I reached for my handbag, the same one they mocked, and felt the weight of the manila folder inside the final move Robert and I had prepared together. I looked across the courtroom, at the daughter who once held my hand through playground crowds and whispered she'd never stop needing me. Then I rose, steady as truth. Your Honor, I said, I have additional evidence to submit. The courtroom seemed to shrink as I walked toward the bench, every eye following the manila folder in my hand. These, I said, placing the documents on the clerk's desk, are financial records spanning 7 years transfers, loans, and checks written from my late husband's accounts to Patricia and Michael Brooks. I paused, letting the weight of the years hang between us, totaling just over $200,000, none of which has ever been repaid. David Chen leapt up. Objection, Your Honor. These materials were not disclosed during discovery. Judge Walsh didn't even look up from the first page. Mr. Chen, she said coolly, Mrs. Hamilton is representing herself. Given that you amended your petition this morning, I'll allow the evidence. Her tone left no room for argument. I turned toward Patricia. Sweetheart, do you remember the lake house repairs, the kitchen remodel, the so-called investment Michael promised would double in 6 months? Patricia's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Michael's fingers twitched against the table, his body rigid with the effort not to explode. And that's not all, I continued, my voice calm but carrying. This, I said, retrieving a small flash drive from the envelope, is a recording of a conversation that took place in my home last month between Patricia and Michael. Chen's objection came fast, almost panicked. Your Honor, this is a gross invasion of privacy. It's inadmissible. I met his eyes and smiled faintly. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state. Mr. Chen, since the conversation happened in my home, with my knowledge and consent, the evidence stands. The courtroom went still as the bailiff inserted the drive into the court's player. The first few seconds crackled. Then Michael's voice filled the speakers, dripping with arrogance. Once the old bats declared incompetent, we can finally live the lifestyle we deserve. A gasp rippled through the spectators. Patricia's sob broke through the static. "Turn it off," she whispered. But it was too late. The truth was out. When the recording ended, Judge Walsh looked from the screen to the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Brooks," she said slowly, "do you deny making that statement?" Michael's throat bobbed. I was upset. I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," I said quietly, "because that's who you are." Chen sputtered, reaching for any foothold left. "Your Honor, this recording only proves Mrs. Hamilton's manipulative intent. She orchestrated this entire situation to trap my clients." "Of course I did," I said. And the courtroom fell silent again. When my husband lay dying, he told me they would come for me. He was right. So I did what any prudent woman would do. I prepared. Judge Walsh's pen stilled. "Mrs. Hamilton, are you admitting that this was a deliberate test, a test of character?" "Your Honor," I said, "and I regret to say they failed." The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing at Patricia and Michael. "This court finds that the petition was filed not out of concern, but greed. You sought to exploit Mrs. Hamilton's age and grief for financial gain. The petition for conservatorship is denied." She paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter for potential perjury and fraud review." Michael shot to his feet, furious. "You can't do this. That money should have been ours. She's senile, manipulative. She set us up." "Sit down, Mr. Brooks," the judge ordered, voice sharp as a whip. "You've said enough." Patricia's tears fell freely now. "Mom, I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know he said that." I looked at her, my daughter, my betrayer, my blood. "You didn't want to know," I said softly. "But ignorance doesn't erase choice." When the gavel struck wood, the sound echoed like thunder. The case was over. The daughter I raised had dragged me into court to steal what her father left in love, and walked out stripped of everything but shame. I gathered my handbag, the same one that had carried both my disguise and my defense, and for the first time in months, my hands didn't shake. Outside, the afternoon sun caught the marble steps, and the air smelled faintly of rain. Patricia stood a few paces behind me, her voice small. "Mom, please, I'm sorry." I turned, studying the girl who'd grown into a woman I barely recognized. "I know you are," I said, "but sorry isn't enough anymore." Then I walked away, not in anger, but in peace. Some endings aren't punishments. They're lessons paid in full. 6 months later, I sat on the porch of my little seaside cottage, the one with white shutters and the sound of gulls circling at dawn. The world had quieted since those long, echoing court days. I'd sold the big house, the one filled with ghosts of arguments and chandeliers that outshone warmth, and kept only what mattered: Robert's wedding photo, my law books, and a battered kettle that whistled the same note it had for 40 years. I'd promised myself peace, not victory, but peace. As I learned, often costs more than justice. Patricia called sometimes, her voice careful, fragile, like a violin tuned too tightly. "How's the ocean?" she'd ask. Loud, I'd say, smiling despite everything. But honest. We didn't talk about money anymore, or wills, or the courtroom, just small things: weather, recipes, memories that didn't cut to touch. Healing doesn't come like a wave. It's slower, quieter, like the tide reclaiming what was lost inch by inch. She was trying. That mattered more than apology. The newspapers had written their pieces back then: "Widow outsmarts greedy heirs," "Elder fraud case turns on daughter's betrayal." I didn't read them. The truth didn't belong to headlines. It belonged to the quiet moments afterward, when the noise fades and you're left with what's still standing. For me, that was integrity, and the faint hope that my daughter might one day forgive herself. One morning, around 7 a.m., I walked to the shoreline with my tea and watched the waves lap the sand. The sun broke through, pale gold on the water, and I thought of Robert. "They came for me," I whispered into the salt air. But I was ready. The gulls cried overhead as if answering. I donated half of the estate, $30 million, to legal aid groups that defend the elderly from financial abuse. Every week I received letters from people who'd found the courage to fight back. Their words reminded me that strength doesn't come from how loud you roar in court, but from how firmly you refuse to be silenced. The other half I kept not out of greed, but gratitude. Gratitude for time, for peace, for the chance to live as myself again. I traveled a little, read more, cooked for neighbors who treated me like Dorothy. Not Mrs. Hamilton, the millionaire widow. Sometimes, late at night. I still replayed the courtroom in my mind, the disbelief in Patricia's eyes when she realized who her mother really was, the silence that followed the gavel, the trembling breath that came after decades of pretending to be less. Pretending had kept me safe, but the truth set me free. One evening, Patricia came to visit. She stood in the doorway of the cottage, hesitant. "It's beautiful here," she said. "It's honest," I replied. We sat at the table overlooking the water, sharing tea the way we used to before everything unraveled. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she whispered. "Maybe not," I said softly, "but you do deserve the chance to earn it." She nodded, tears glinting in the light of the setting sun. "I never realized you were so strong." I smiled. "You never had to. Until now." We talked until the moon rose. For the first time in years, I felt something like grace settle between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. As she left that night, Patricia hugged me longer than she ever had as an adult. "Good night, Mom," she said. I watched her taillights disappear down the coastal road and whispered, "Good night, my girl." The ocean murmured its endless truth beside me, that love, even fractured, can still find its way home, and that respect, once lost, can be rebuilt if you're willing to face yourself first. I looked at the horizon and thought of every woman who'd been told she was too old, too gentle, too naive to fight back. To them, I'd say, don't let them write your ending. Write it yourself, in ink that never fades. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me what would you have done in my place. Your voice matters more than you think.